The screams were muffled by the sound of waves and drums. A burning village lit the northern sky, and in the shadows of collapsing homes, women were dragged away by rough hands. For the men of the north, war was not only about conquest, it was about possession. When the Vikings attacked, they didn't only take gold, cattle, or land. They took something far more personal, something that left scars across generations, the wives of their enemies. In the chronicles of medieval Europe, whispers about Viking raids painted a picture that was more than just steel and blood. It was terror creeping into homes, fear seeping into the hearts of women who knew what awaited them if their husbands fell. For many, death seemed kinder than survival. What the Vikings did to the wives of those they defeated was a dark secret buried beneath sagas of heroism and exploration. Tonight, we open the locked chest of Viking history and pull out what was long hidden. Forget the romantic tales of fearless warriors and discoverers of new lands. Behind the shields and ships lies a cruelty that has been brushed aside for centuries. A cruelty that left women broken, families shattered, and entire communities silenced. What did the Vikings truly do when they captured the wives of their enemies? Were they treated as spoils of war, traded like cattle, or worse, subjected to punishments designed to humiliate and destroy? And why have these stories been erased, softened, or left out of history books? This is not the Viking story of TV dramas or adventure novels. This is the Viking story that will haunt you. The story of women trapped in a nightmare that began the moment their homes were set ablaze. Stay with me, because as we dive deeper, you will learn the terrible truth that history tried to bury. To understand the cruelty, we must first understand the world the Vikings came from. Between the 8th and 11th centuries, Viking ships cut across the seas like knives through flesh. They raided coasts from England to Ireland, from France to the Mediterranean. To some, they were traders, explorers, and settlers. To others, they were nothing more than predators. In Norse culture, women were valued within their communities. Viking wives could own property, inherit land, and even divorce men who mistreated them. But this respect ended the moment war began. When the Vikings set foot on foreign soil, women outside their tribe were not seen as human beings with rights. They became war booty, symbols of domination. Christian monks who survived raids described Viking attacks in chilling detail. They wrote of women carried off screaming, of families torn apart, of churches burning as men and women alike were taken as slaves. While men were chained to labor, women carried the heavier weight, forced into sexual slavery, humiliation, and endless fear. Enemy wives were especially vulnerable. To Vikings, capturing a man's wife was more than just theft. It was the ultimate insult. It was proof that they had not only defeated their enemy's sword, but also his pride and legacy. In some accounts, women were paraded publicly, stripped of dignity before entire villages, a cruel message to all who dared resist. Slave markets thrived from these raids. The Viking economy was not built solely on trade and plunder, it was also built on flesh. In Dublin, York, and Hedeby, women taken from raids were auctioned off. Some were forced into Viking households, where they lived as concubines under the wives of their captors. Others were shipped far away to lands they would never escape. Behind the grand tales of sagas, the truth remained. Every raid meant wives became pawns in a cruel game of power. Let us look closer at what truly happened when Vikings captured enemy wives. In 845 AD, during the infamous Viking raid on Paris, chroniclers recorded scenes of devastation. The Vikings not only looted churches, they took noble women and the wives of defenders as prizes. These women were dragged through the streets, mocked and carried to ships. For many, the River Seine was the last sight of their homeland. In Anglo-Saxon lands, similar horrors unfolded. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle notes that women were taken and dishonored, their cries echoing across the burning countryside. To Vikings, taking an enemy's wife was more than personal pleasure. It was psychological warfare. Imagine a man forced to watch his wife dragged away while he lay dying. Imagine entire villages knowing that their women would never return the same, but it didn't end there. In some sagas, like the story of Olaf Tryggvason, captured women were given as gifts to allies, traded for loyalty, or sacrificed to seal bonds. Some were forced into public rituals, where their humiliation was part of the ceremony of conquest. Worse still were the punishments inflicted on wives of powerful men. In some cases, these women were mutilated or tortured, left alive only to carry shame back to their communities. Viking cruelty was not always quick. It was deliberate, designed to leave lasting wounds. Archaeological evidence tells its own silent story. Graves unearthed in Scandinavia reveal women buried with chains, suggesting a life of bondage. Others were found with injuries that spoke of violence, not of battle, but of captivity. The bones whispered what chronicles could not always write. For the Vikings, cruelty was a tool of power. To take an enemy's wife was to erase his honor, destroy his bloodline, and show the world that resistance was futile. Now imagine the silence of those women, their voices buried under centuries of glorified Viking tales. Their suffering rarely made it into the sagas sung around the fire. Instead, they became ghosts, remembered only in fragments of chronicles or bones unearthed from graves. Think of the fear that swept through villages at the sound of longships. Children clung to their mothers prayed for protection, and men fought, knowing that if they fell, their wives would endure a fate worse than death for the women themselves. Survival meant living with shame forced upon them. To be taken meant dishonor, and in medieval Christian society, it often meant rejection by their own people if they somehow returned. Many never came home. Those who did were haunted by memories of being used as tools of power and humiliation. These were not nameless women. They were wives, mothers, daughters. They loved, they dreamed, they prayed. And yet in the Viking world of conquest, they were stripped of identity and turned into property. The emotional impact stretched far beyond the moment of capture. It destroyed families, created generations of trauma, and silenced voices that deserved to be heard. This is why these stories must be told, not to glorify cruelty, but to remember the cost of war. When we look at Viking history today, we often see adventure, exploration, and bravery. But history is not only made of victories, it is made of suffering too. The wives who were taken, humiliated, and forgotten deserve to be remembered. Their silence is part of the story. The cruelty of the Vikings reminds us of the darkness that can hide behind the glory of conquest. It shows us how war is never just about armies or kings. It is about ordinary people whose lives are shattered in the process. If there is a lesson here, it is that history must be told honestly. We cannot choose to remember only the glory and forget the pain. The women who suffered in the shadows deserve more than silence. They deserve acknowledgement. So when you hear of Vikings as fearless explorers, remember too the wives left behind in burning villages, the women dragged onto ships, and the cries that faded into the night. Their story is not entertainment. It is a warning of what happens when cruelty is celebrated and humanity is forgotten. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that reveal the hidden, painful truths of history and remind us that even in the darkest times, the voices of the forgotten must be heard.